back in the garage, back in the garage, back in the garage today, back in the garage today. Alright guys, back in the garage today, getting ready to remove and replace the spark plugs in my 1290 Super Adventure. Now the first thing you need to do is remove the fuel tank. I'm going to link that video up there. That'll show you how to remove it and then how to get it back on when you're finished. You also need to know how to remove the air box. I've already done that because I'm in the middle of doing the Rottweiler air box install. So if you need to see that video of how to get to that step, I'm going to link that up here. Watch those two videos. That'll bring you back to where we're at currently. And then you can learn how to replace your spark plugs. All right, so we have the fuel tank and the air box removed. Next thing we're gonna do is come down here to the radiator. There are 2 screws underneath here. You can hit them up with the Torx. I'm gonna use a socket, I believe they're 8mm. We can take both of these out. All right, so with those 2 screws removed, we should be able to rock that radiator forward just a little bit, but not much. All right, back over here on the right-hand side of the bike, we want to remove that screw right there. All right, so with that screw removed, we're gonna pull off this heat protector. You can see it kind of pops right off of here. Give me a second, I'll have it off there. Okay, so there is another screw holding this in, but in the meantime, I'll just kind of rock this thing up out of the way and we'll move on to the next step. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is disconnect this connector here. And because this damn solenoid's in my way and I am deleting all of this stuff anyway with the SAS delete kit, I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing out of my way and disconnect these hoses and everything so I'll get more room to work. All right, so working on the front cylinder, we've got 2 ignition coils we're gonna unplug. You've got this one here, the white one, and the black one over there. Just remember where they plug back in. And it's just a simple little plastic push clip here. Just be careful, you don't want to break anything. All right, so you can see I got the plugs undone there. Now we're just gonna pop out the ignition coils. All you're gonna do is just pull them straight up out of their slots. You might have to work them just, oh, actually, that one popped out of place pretty easily. There's one ignition coil. Now what I'm gonna have to do is just push this radiator forward just a little bit. It should give me enough clearance to get that out of there. All right, so up here on top of the radiator, I ended up having to take this bolt out in order to give me enough clearance to get this ignition coil out right here. Otherwise, it wants to hit on the shroud around the fan. Also, something I thought was pretty cool, if you look right there, it says white coupler. That way when you go back to hook this thing up later, you don't screw up and put the wrong one on. All right, so next up, we actually need to remove the spark plugs. I'm gonna work on this one first, and then I'll kind of show you the attachment I have there. But it is a 14mm that's gonna take that out of there. All right, so in order to get this plug loosened up, I just put a couple of universals on here and it fit down in there pretty nice. Now I'm gonna show you how I get spark plugs out of bikes. Let's try this little telescoping magnet so we can pull it out of there. There we go. Now, go ahead and make notice which spark plug this is because we are running different spark plugs from this one to this one. They're not exactly the same, so I want to make sure we put the right one back in inside. Actually not in too bad shape. Next up, we want to remove the spark plug over here on the side of the cylinder. See how we're going to get down in there. Alright, so we got the spark plug all loosened up. Let's see if we can pull it out of here. And there we have it. That one actually doesn't look too bad either. But again, remember, these are not the same plugs going into each side of the cylinder. I'm just gonna set them down next to the ignition coils in the order that they came out, and then when we go to put the new plugs in, shouldn't have any problems. All right, so to get to the spark plugs on the rear cylinder and also the valve cover, because I'm gonna be checking the valves, step one is to come back here. We need to remove this screw right here, which is an 8mm, and all the little washers and everything that go along with it. Then we're gonna cut this cable tie, and probably some more. This is the little washer you don't want to lose when you take this off. It actually goes underneath these 2 tabs for when we put it back together. All right, so I did cut this cable tie and the one over here. Next thing we want to do is we're going to cut this cable tie and then we're going to unplug this connector here. All right, so with all that stuff disconnected, you can see I kind of rocked this heat shield up. I left it in here, but now we can get in here. We're going to unplug this ignition coil and then we're going to pull this spark plug out. It wasn't the easiest thing to get unplugged there. Now we're just going to pop the ignition coil out of there. There it is. All right, This one is the outside one. And again, on the rear cylinder, just like the front cylinder, KTM did mark this with white coupler in case you were to forget. It is the white plug that's going to plug back in when the time comes. Next up though, we're going to put a socket on here and remove the spark plug. Alright, get the spark plug loosened up. Not too bad. Alright, so now we need to get to the other spark plug. We're going to disconnect the ignition coil right here. Simple plug, and then we're going to pop the ignition coil out and then get to the spark plug. Now you can see I've got it popped up under there. Unfortunately, the clearance is way too tight, so we're going to remove this little plastic tray up here. I'll show you how to do that. That should give us enough room that we can get the ignition coil out. So it's going to be a little hard to see, but there's a plastic tray right underneath here where all these connectors and stuff get plugged in. It's actually pretty simple to take off. All we're going to do is cut a few zip ties, and that will allow that tray to pull out of there, and that should give us enough room that we've got clearance to pull the ignition coil out. Alright guys, so if you take a look here, you can see I cut this zip tie, and this one over here, and you can see that this tray will move. I'm just going to kind of snake it up out of here so it is out of the way. We'll worry about putting it back in later. There you go. Now, while it's still going to be a little tight, we should, yeah, there we go, be able to pull that ignition coil out. Now, obviously, the next thing we want to do is get a socket down here on the spark plug. We're working on this center one over here. Get it removed, and then we're going to pop the valve cover so I can check the valves. So this is probably the easiest of all the spark plugs to remove because I can fit an extension and the socket right down in there. No having to work in a tight spot in this case. All right, so we got it all loosened up. Let's see if I can get it pulled out of here. There it is. All right, we're gonna start with the spark plug over here in the center. This is a NGK L-car spark plug. Check your service manual, make sure you have the right one. Service manual for mine says the gap should be at 1 millimeter. I checked it, actually I had to adjust it a little bit. It is at 1 millimeter. We're gonna drop that down in there and get it tightened up. Just a real quick heads up, I don't like dropping it all the way down in there in case the gap would get changed, so I actually use the little magnet thing to drop it down as low as I can get it. Now remember, this was the easy one to get to that we can get to from the top. I always recommend starting this by hand. That way you don't have to worry about cross threading anything, and then once you get it down in there, and then you can tighten it up the rest of the way with the wrench. You can look up the torque spec on that. I may try to flash it up on the screen if I remember. I just tighten them down to make sure that crush washer's crushed and not over tighten anything. All right, we got that spark plug tightened up. Now we're gonna drop in the ignition coil. Hopefully you kept them separated, you know which one's which. This one's gonna drop down in there. We're gonna make sure that it's seated properly, and then we're gonna hook it back up. Make sure you have a good tight seat on the ignition coil, and then you are going to plug in the black plug. And now we've got our first spark plug in. Now we're gonna work our way to the outside plug. Okay, so the outside cylinder uses the LMAR plug. Again, gonna drop right down in there. Same deal, start it by hand so you don't cross thread it, and then tighten it up. With the plug reinstalled, we're going to take our ignition coil, same sort of deal. Make sure it's got a good tight seat on there, and then I'm going to have to flip it around, but we're going to plug in the white connector. Alright, so while we have the rear valve cover and spark plugs put back in, we've got this whole damn mess here because we took this tray out because we needed room. So I'm going to pop this back down in here. It does go in this orientation. Get all the little plugs and stuff back in, wrap some zip ties around, and get this all tidied up. Okay, so before zip tying this entire tray back down, make sure you run a zip tie through here because there was one on here holding this plug on from the factory, and we're going to make sure we put it back on. So put zip ties here, here, and here. Obviously make sure you trim them up. Before we finish tidying the rest of this up, we want to get these screwed back down. Now this washer actually goes below here, and then the screw goes through. I'll show you here in a second. So you've got the screw, the 3 connectors, the washer, and then the part of the frame it just went into. If you're working on the 1290, make sure this stays exposed because this is your heated seat plug-in, so you want to make sure you can get to it. All of this stuff, I've kind of put all the little plugs back down in there where they go. Now we're going to grab some zip ties, zip tie this back over to here, zip tie this back over to here, just so everything's kind of held out of the way. If you cut the tie on this heat shield like I did, make sure you get it back into place and then tighten up a zip tie around it. Alright, you can see the valve cover's back on. Again, we're going to start with that spark plug right there first. Alright, so we got the L-car spark plug. Drop that down into the cylinder. With the spark plug installed, now get your ignition coil, and again, drop that down in there and then make sure it's got a good tight seat. And just a reminder, it is the black plug that's going to plug into this ignition coil. Alright, now we're down to our final spark plug, the one that goes on the outside of the cylinder. Let's grab it. Alright, we got the spark plug in. Now we're going to drop the ignition coil down in. And with the ignition coil back on, hook up the white connector, and we're done with the spark plugs. Now I got to remember to put this screw back in because I took it out. Also put the shroud back on. It just kind of snaps there, and then there's a screw that goes in right there. Alright, so with this shroud reattached, radiator reattached here, we're going to move back around here and put in these two screws that we took out earlier on, and then we're done with the radiator. Okay, so that's it. That's how you change the spark plugs on a 1290 Super Adventure. If you need to know how to put your bike back together the rest of the way, check out the links in the description below or the videos I linked earlier in the video to learn how to put your fuel tank back on and all that good stuff. But hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button. If you got any questions, let me know in the comment section below. And as always, talk to you again soon.